Hello everybody, and welcome back to the launch of Blue Origin's new Shepard rocket on the NS-13 mission. They delayed from earlier this morning, about 2.5 hours ago, due to clouds. There were clouds in the way, and the NASA experiment on board the rocket requires clear skies. So for customer compliance, they had to delay until the clouds cleared. Now, the humidity is very low there in West Texas, but there were some clouds. So, welcome, and let's take a look at what we'll be launching today. So this is going to be sort of a rehash of what I already talked about earlier, but this is going to be Blue Origin's new Shepard rocket. This is a suborbital rocket, meaning it does not go up and orbit around the Earth. It just flies straight up to space and then comes straight back down. Now, not all suborbital rockets go straight up and down. There are, sounding rockets and other, other small rockets that arc in different directions. But the key component of achieving orbit is going really fast. So in order to get into orbit in low Earth orbit, you have to be going at least like 17,000 miles per hour. And New Shepard doesn't come anywhere close to that. In fact, when it reaches its apex, the apex of its flight, it's going 0 miles per hour because it only thrusts up to a certain point, and then it just, the capsule part at the top that contains the payloads detaches from the booster, and it just ballistically continues to fly straight up until until gravity makes it stop, and then it starts to fall back down. And then the booster propulsively lands itself, similar to a Falcon 9, on a landing pad a couple of miles away from the launch site. And the capsule comes down on parachutes and will emit a very brief burst of propulsion at the last second to cushion the landing, similar to a Soyuz module. Soyuz capsule, I should say. So, it's a small rocket. It's only, 59 feet high, 18 meters high. Uses hydrogen and oxygen for fuel, similar to the Delta IV Heavy, which, in fact, will be launching this Saturday. Much bigger rocket. Yeah, so this is a funny looking rocket, but it was basically a proof of concept, a chance for Blue Origin to test some of their their systems and their technologies for propulsive landing prior to the development of their New Glenn rocket, which is the big deal. New Glenn is going to be a monster and will be fully reusable, similar to SpaceX Starship. I'm not sure what progress they've made on New Glenn. I think their focus initially is maybe not so much on the New Glenn itself, but on the BE-4 engine that will propel it, which they have a big manufacturing facility in Alabama near Huntsville that will be working on the BE-4 engine, which will also be used not just on the New Glenn but on the ULA Vulcan rocket. So ULA is going to be using a Blue Origin engine. Yeah, unfortunately, Blue Origin is not as media ubiquitous, whatever. They're not as upfront and in everybody's face about what they're doing as SpaceX is. So whatever progress they are making is pretty much, kept close to their chest until they actually do a mission. But today, what we will see is the launch of 12 customer payloads, which will be situated in the capsule at the top of the rocket, including NASA's Tipping Point program for testing lunar landing technology. And so what they'll do is, what New Shepard does is it launches up, the capsule detaches, ballistically arcs up into a parabolic trajectory, and then it comes back down, giving the payloads a few minutes of weightlessness, maybe up to like 6 minutes, something like that. Why, you ask? Well, because getting into space is hard. Getting into orbit is harder. Getting into space is hard. And conducting tests that require zero gravity is not easy. Orbital launches are very expensive. Like I said, orbit requires incredible speed, and speed requires fuel. And fuel is heavy, and lifting large amounts of mass off the ground is very expensive. Therefore, a smaller rocket with a vertical trajectory, it just goes up and comes back down, allows companies, organizations, and NASA to conduct brief zero-gravity experiments at a much lower cost, without costing, tens of thousands of dollars per kilogram or whatever it is. So, here we are. Now, NASA's Tipping Point. I actually have a video. It's less than 1.5 minutes. It's a brief video explaining a little bit about the program. Let's go ahead and check that out.
NASA and Blue Origin are partnering to test key technologies for landing on the Moon and Mars. For the first time, NASA will test its new integrated system from launch to landing. Made up of precision landing sensors, advanced algorithms, and a new computer, NASA's Safe and Precise Landing Integrated Capabilities Evolution, or SPLICE technology suite, can improve landing safety and accuracy on other worlds. New Shepard will help develop and mature these technologies for potential use by NASA and its commercial partners.
Wow, there they go.
With SPLICE technologies on board, landing sites near hazardous boulders and shadowed craters will no longer be off limits.
And liftoff.
Opening up a range of destinations
Touchdown confirmed.
for future Artemis missions to the Moon and beyond.
There we go. I forgot I didn't put my my launch countdown timer at the top, but there you go. So just a reminder for the folks in the chat, this is a clean zone. Please keep the chat family friendly and appropriate, or we'll have to take action, because we've got to. We are here to serve all customers, and we've got young folks who are fascinated by space, and they don't need to be seeing a bunch of filth in the chat. So let's see if there are any questions. And if you do have any questions, please make sure to tag my name. Just say raw space. That way it will be highlighted for me and I will see it. Thank you. All right. Praveen Chudhari asks, does anyone know about Ra? I know about Ra. He's me. And I'm Batman. Shivanash NA says the commercial use of space is greater than the militarization of space. That is definitely true. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Unfortunately, militarization always seems to creep in. Everywhere there's the potential for exerting some sort of control or whatever. With that said, military technologies have been leveraged into numerous useful civilian technologies, but I'd rather just go straight for the science and the civilian applications rather than feeding the war machine, as it were. Radhika Malvia asks, when is it supposed to launch? It'll be launching in 45 minutes at 12:40 a.m. Eastern Time, 4:40 p.m. GMT. If it's not delayed again, I'm not sure what the... here, let's ask Nightbot weather, Van Horn, Texas, because that's near the Blue Origin launch facility. N129509 Swaroop Chanda asks, what are your opinions toward the Dragon crew? You mean Crew Dragon? I think it's amazing. I think it's wonderful. It's an excellent step forward. And even though it's still pretty expensive, it's cheaper than a Soyuz per seat. And I'm very, very glad that SpaceX is having success with that program. They've had some setbacks, but they're doing good things. Ataruxo says he's heard that Blue Origin is having trouble with the BE-4 engines. That's unfortunate. So, yeah, I haven't heard anything about their progress with the BE-4. So, I guess we'll have to wait and see on that. But, you know, development of new space systems is notoriously expensive and slow. So, Blue Origin's motto is Gradatum Ferociter, which is Latin, and it means step by step ferociously. The idea being that they're in no rush, they're in no great rush, but they want to move forward in a relentless fashion. So, yeah, we'll see. It's a dramatic tagline, but we'll see if they can keep up the progress. I mean, Jeff Bezos, who of course is the founder of Amazon, is the moneybags behind Blue Origin, and Blue Origin is a big priority for him personally and financially, and so hopefully he's able to leverage his resources in such a way that they can, they have sufficient tools to work through the challenges and get the systems built, the BE-4 engine, the New Glenn rocket, because this isn't a SpaceX versus Blue Origin thing. It's a humanity versus stagnation thing. We need to move forward as a species, and companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin are helping us do that. Cosmic Gamings asks, is New Glenn a two-staged rocket? I think so. Let me check. New Glenn. 2 stages, yeah. So there's here, let me bring this up on the screen so you can see. Flip. There we go. So, whoa. Oh. Media challenges. Full screen. Here we go. Yeah. So there's an illustration. Obviously, there's no actual New Glenn rocket yet, but that's roughly what it's going to look like. And the design could change. I mean, we know, there have been dramatic design changes with the Starship craft as SpaceX has proceeded with their development of that. but this is their concept, design. So we see the big lower stage with fins at the bottom and at the top, and then their interstage and their upper stage. That's a big interstage. I wonder about that. But in any case, the design is always subject to change, so. All right, we got a bunch of questions. Now, I may have to, real quick, jump over to, not real quick, but I may have to abruptly jump over to the Blue Origin broadcast if they start that, which shouldn't be for at least another 15 minutes or so. So we should have a little bit of time here. I think they start about a half hour before launch. Okay, so getting caught up, Marcio Cumplido asks, please, Raw, do we have any news concerning the Starlink 12 or 13 launch? So the next Starlink launch, I'm not seeing any firm dates on the calendar. So, yeah, so we'll have to wait and see on that. But the Starlink launch was delayed due to rough seas in the recovery area, due to some storms that were in the Atlantic at the time, and we'll just have to wait and see on a makeup date. A Toy asks, what about the Blue Origin engine, or the BE engine? So the BE4 engine, just refresh my memory here. Interesting. Okay. So the BE4 engine it doesn't use hydrogen, it doesn't use RP1, it's not hypergolic or solid propellant. It uses liquefied natural gas and liquid oxygen, which is interesting. Yeah, off the top of my head now, I'm not a rocket scholar, but off the top of my head, I can't think of any other liquefied natural gas powered rockets. But if anybody knows of any, let me know, because that's a new one on me. And of course, the liquid oxygen is the oxidizer, which you always have to have because there's no oxygen in space to allow combustion. Space and Science, or Science and Space, in fact, asks what software I use for live videos. Like most folks, I use Open Broadcaster Studio. It's free. It's very useful. It's got a lot of good features. Can be glitchy. Sometimes it crashes. Sometimes it behaves weird. Like on our 24/7 Starman stream with relaxing music, which you should all go visit sometime. Sometimes OBS starts lagging the audio, so the music is stuttery. Whenever that happens, I just have to restart it. Not that I don't restart the stream, I restart the software. But yeah, that's a sort of been a thorn in my side for a long time. I wish that there was a fix for it. American Flyer 72 asks to touch on the Artemis program and Blue Origin's work on it. I don't remember if they're working on the whole lunar lander or just part of it. So Blue Origin has their blue moon. Isn't it Blue Moon? Isn't that what they called it? Anyway, the big lunar lander with the spherical fuel tanks that was unveiled a year ago, something like that, a long time ago, by Jeff Bezos, to great fanfare. So it's in development, of course, but I think they're working on the lander and the A lander, and but all of the moon systems are pretty much TBD at this point, because like I don't even know if like the lunar gateway is off the table at this point, or if it's just, you know, on the ropes, or what the deal is with that. It ain't over till the fat lady sings, as they say, in Independence Day. And you know, just like with Starship, I'm rooting for Starship. I think it's wonderful, you know, and they're making progress, but you know, it's slow going, you know. So once we start getting some of these lunar systems, the lander and orbiters or whatever components, you know, actually physically designed and built, you know, then we'll see what happens. But Kevin still mentions that Blue Origin is one of 3 companies working on the lunar lander. That's right. There are 3 different landers being worked on currently. Checking on Blue Origin's Twitter feed, which is generally the source for the most up-to-date info on launches, and Blue Origin hasn't said anything. Zach Peters says he doesn't think the clouds will break. He might as well give up. Or they might as well give up. Oscar Mendez says that this kind of seems like yesterday's news. How many times are you going to send this up before actually building a real rocket? Oh, the thing is, getting in your car and driving to the store is yesterday's news as well. But you still need to do it because you need groceries. You know, and so Blue Origin has customers that pay to launch their scientific payloads, or their technology demo or experimental payloads on the Blue Origin New Shepard rocket, because it's a lot cheaper than an orbital launch. And so long as there is a market for that service, and so long as it's financially viable for Blue Origin, they're going to keep doing it. You know, so like why are there so many Falcon 9 launches? Well, because there's a lot of satellites and other things that need to be launched. You know, and not only paying customers, but also SpaceX's own Starlink satellites. So there's a lot that needs to get up there, and the only way to do that is to launch the rockets. Xenoraptor thinks I should work for NASA. Well, I've always thought about it. I don't recall if I've actually applied to work for NASA. I did apply once to work for SpaceX 3-ish years ago, something like that. It would have been as a software developer on their Starlink program, but the process was taking too long, and I had to accept a position locally here in North Carolina. President Kang asks, will Blue Origin and SpaceX kill Roscosmos? I mean, I don't think they'll kill Roscosmos, but obviously the global rocket industry, I mean, all other launch providers, from Arianespace to Roscosmos to JAXA and ISRO, have all been affected by the, you know, the SpaceX effect. And I mean, Blue Origin isn't doing any orbital launches currently, but I mean, if they're able to pull off New Glenn, then they will be. And you know, I mean, in true capitalistic fashion, I mean, competition is ultimately good for, you know, the consumer. And you know, for example, SpaceX's Crew Dragon is cheaper to fly on than Roscosmos's Soyuz. Now, some of those numbers are I mean, those numbers are largely arbitrary. Like, you know, the Soyuz didn't used to cost so much to fly on, but the Russians really jacked up the price in recent years after the retirement of the space shuttle, because that was our only way to get people to space. And so the laws of market, economics applied, and because they were now the sole provider of orbital human launches, they were able to jack up the price. But now they're going to lose a lot of business because of SpaceX and possibly Boeing's Starliner, if they can work through their technical issues on that one. Xaba Krizan asks if they're going to attempt landing. Yes, they are. So the new Shepard rocket is a propulsive self-landing vehicle. So it takes off straight up. The capsule detaches. The booster comes back down and propulsively lands itself on a landing pad a couple of miles from the launch site. Very similar to a SpaceX Falcon 9, except it looks really funky. Like it's got these flaps at the top that come out to provide drag and provide drag and control the descent. It's got these legs that boop out from the sides. That's a technical term. And but yeah, this will actually be the 7th launch of this specific booster. So they're very reusable, partially because as a suborbital rocket that only re-enters the atmosphere at about 700 miles per hour instead of the 3,500 miles per hour that a Falcon 9 booster does, they aren't subjected to nearly the new Shepard booster is not subjected to nearly the same kind of destructive forces and heating and whatever that an orbital booster is. And so a single booster is likely to last for more launches. C. Walder says Roscosmos will kill Roscosmos. That's funny. I'm really behind on the questions. I got to catch up here. N1295 asks, he's from India and wants to ask what kind of material is used in the manufacturing of BE. Do you mean the new Shepard rocket or the BE4 or BE3 engine? New Shepard uses the BE3. New Glenn and Vulcan will use the BE4. I mean, they're rocket materials, so aluminum, steel. I'm not sure what sort of carbon composites they may be using. The materials aren't particularly rocket sciencey. Well, they are specifically rocket sciencey, but they're not like space age materials. In fact, they are space age materials. What I mean is they're not like futuristic materials, nanotubes or whatever. I mean, look at SpaceX. They're designing their flagship new rocket with stainless steel. I mean, it's a very specific type of stainless steel, but it's stainless steel nonetheless. Xaba Krizan asks, isn't it the New Glenn that they launch now? No, New Glenn is in development, and we don't really know what their progress on that is. But so allergies, man. Oh my gosh. Aren't you glad I pressed mute? Oh my goodness. My eyes are like bugging me. Natural gas, methane. Okay. Space TV asks, how is NASA's tipping point program related to the Artemis program? Also, thanks for your live streams. Well, you're quite welcome. NASA's tipping point program is I don't know a great deal of detail about it, but from literally all I know about the tipping point program is what I saw in that very brief video I showed you a little while ago. And so it's basically a landing assistance system that uses sensors, presumably radar and optical, to evaluate the landscape underneath the lander in support of landing systems, which may be used on the Blue Moon lander or maybe one of the other landers. I'm not sure. Microsound is giving Jeff Bezos a pass for now because he kept The Expanse alive, referring to the TV show. Good show, by the way. It's very refreshing for a hard science fiction, a fan of hard science fiction. Jay Gunno asks, why don't rockets get, this is a good question, why don't rockets get launched closer to the equator? Is it too costly to launch from those areas? The thing is, most of human population lives north of the equator, and most of the population of the world lives in the temperate latitudes of the northern hemisphere, which are thousands of miles from the equator. The equator itself is full of deserts and jungles, and there's not as much. Like if you look on a globe, there's not as much land around the equator. Much of the land mass of the world is in the northern hemisphere. And so the countries that are launching rocket, and just the not the demographics, but the world's wealthy countries are simply not located near the equator. You've got the United States and the European countries and the Asian countries and et cetera, and then even Australia, which actually doesn't really have much of a presence in space. But the big players are the United States, Russia, France, Germany, Japan, and India. And of those, India is the closest to the equator. But the thing is, if your people and your workforce, your manufacturing facilities, are in a country which is thousands of miles from the equator, and you don't have any territory that's anywhere near the equator, it's going to be difficult to launch from near the equator. And it becomes both a cost-benefit consideration and also a security consideration, because a lot of launches, as we know, are military in nature or national security in nature, and they're classified, and so you have to consider as a country, do you want to build a launch facility out in some tropical island where it's unsecure and exposed to whatever, in order to gain a few extra miles per hour of rotational momentum from the rotation of the Earth closer to the equator. Like from Florida, now you will notice that countries tend to put launch facilities on their eastern coasts as far south as they can, which is why our primary launch facility in the United States is in Florida, because it is south and it is east. You can't get much more souther or easter. And Cape Canaveral, which sticks out from the Florida mainland, is really the perfect geographic location in the United States from which to launch, because it's a no, shoot, I just had a brain fade. Because it sticks out from the mainland, it allows you to launch to the north or to the south for polar launches without overflying any populated areas. And that's the main concern. Unless you're China, in which case you build your launch facilities far to the inland west, and then your first stage boosters get rained down on your population as they pass over the country. But we won't talk about that. Warhawk Me asks, do you think Blue Origin is concentrating on their infrastructure first? They seem to be. They're building a lot. Okay. So they seem to be focusing on their infrastructure because, they've been building some massive facilities in Huntsville, Alabama, and in Florida, near KSC, and what goes on there, I'm not sure. It would be, if I lived in Florida, it would be easier to try to investigate some of this stuff, see if I could, poke around, get a tour or whatever. But I do not. It's a long drive with numerous supercharges in between. Because I drive a Tesla. N1295 asks, how much does a reusable rocket engine cut the cost of a spaceflight? Well, I mean, a rocket engine is a very complex and very expensive item. If it can be reused, then you're going to be saving millions of dollars per launch. I mean, even if it costs, whatever, hundreds of thousands of dollars to refurbish the thing, it's still way cheaper. I mean, even just for example, I don't know a lot of the operating costs of various rocket parts, but just for example, the Falcon payload fairing is $6 million just for the payload fairing. The nose cone that opens up and exposes the payload to space. Rockets are very expensive to build, and everything that you can and that's why SpaceX has invested in the two Ms. Tree and Ms. Chief, little puns, the ships with the 200-foot giant nets on top that they drive around and attempt to catch the payload fairing halves as they fall toward the ocean. It's worth it to them to do that because, the cost of operating those ships is not negligible, but it's cheaper than building new payload fairings every time. James Vickers asks, what role will New Glenn fill in spacebound missions? Well, New Glenn is a heavy lift rocket. It's a big rocket, and it will be able to launch large payloads into, well, wherever we want, really. That could consist of, space telescopes or spy satellites, because, like, you wouldn't think that a spy satellite would need to be that big, but consider these NROL Delta IV Heavy missions. The payload is very large and very heavy, and it requires the lifting power of a Falcon of a Delta IV Heavy to get it up to wherever it's going, which is classified. So yeah, more satellites and bigger satellites. And like, for example, the James Webb Space Telescope, which has been, long delayed and way over budget, can't fly on a Falcon Heavy, for example. I could be mistaken, and if I am, I'm sorry, but I don't think it can fly on a Falcon Heavy. Firstly, because the Falcon Heavy doesn't have a vertical integration capability. I mean, they don't have a facility in which they can vertically integrate the rocket. That is, put the payload on the rocket in a vertical configuration, as opposed to assembling it on the ground and then raising it up. But also because I don't think the payload fairing is big enough. And SpaceX hasn't invested the time and money into developing a larger payload fairing for the Falcon rockets, because they're focusing their development efforts on Starship. Andrew Vanderplatz asks, so are they supposed to control the return of the booster? Yes, the new Shepard booster comes back down, and fins, like air brake fins, deploy at the top that slow its descent, and then it has fins on the side that control its attitude as it comes down. Then as it gets near the ground, it fires its single BE3 engine to slow itself down and come to a stop, on the landing pad. Now, the BE3 is, now first of all, this is a smaller booster, a much smaller booster than a Falcon 9. But the BE3 engine is also a much less powerful engine than the Merlin engines that the Falcon uses. And so they're actually able to hover the new Shepard rocket, which Falcon 9 can't do. Like if they kept, even at like minimum thrust, if they kept thrusting, they would actually stop and start going back up again. That's why they have to do what they call the hover slam, where they time the thrust of the landing burn such that the rocket reaches 0 miles per hour in a downward direction at the same point that it touches the ground. I mean, it's going to reach 0 miles per hour when it hits the ground anyway, one way or the other. But the objective is to time it very precisely so that, the thrust slows it down to a perfect stop, roughly a perfect stop, as it touches down. So yes, I do need to mention in the chat, now I know I'm a few minutes behind here, but I'm having a good time answering questions. So the launch today has in fact been scrubbed. This is per Blue Origin. We've detected a potential issue with the power supply to the experiments. Launch is scrubbed for today. New launch target forthcoming. So what I will do is I'll put up a thing I'll put up a caption in the video, and I'll keep answering questions so I can get them taken care of, because we're having a good chat here. Some ASMR typing there. There we go. All right. Now, yes, so today's launch is scrubbed, and we'll have to stay tuned for the makeup date from Blue Origin. But I will continue answering questions for the next few minutes, so let me resume. Irfan Hussein asks if my kids are at school. No, the county I live in, the school district here, they have the kids going to school 2 days a week. Well, they have it split up so that half the kids go on Monday and Tuesday, and then the other half go on Thursday and Friday. And then the days that they don't go to school, they do school from home. So my two kids are Monday and Tuesday, so this Thursday is a school from home day. All right. The chat just jumped down a long ways, so I have to... Yes. A Toy asks, can China do boosters landing? What do you think? I heard just a vague reference to some sort of reusable Chinese booster, but no, none of the production Chinese rockets land like a Falcon 9. They may be working on one though. I don't have much information on that. China is very non-communicative when it comes to you know, pretty much everything. So I don't know what they're working on, but I'll have to see if there's some information on that, because I think I did hear something about a reusable Chinese booster. Anurag Ganesh asks, "Hello, sir. Why can't we build a launch station up above in the space like sci-fi movies?" So we do have the International Space Station, which it orbits at approximately 240 miles or 400 kilometers up, and has been for 20 years now, and has been, manned the entire time. There's never been a time in the past 20 years, if you're college aged, then there have been humans in space your entire life, which is pretty cool. However, the vast investment that was required to build and maintain the space station, unfortunately, diverted resources that might have otherwise been used to reach out further, for example, to Mars or to establish a permanent base on the moon. But I love the ISS. It's awesome. But, honestly, I think space is not nearly a big enough priority for politicians and the general public. I think we should have, 100 Hubbles up there and, a dozen space stations. But that's not the world we live in currently. Maybe maybe in the future we'll have, a more prolific presence up there. Irfan Hossein asks, do people fart in space? They sure do. They pretty much do that wherever they exist. So, yeah, they do. Shivanesh N.A. or Shivansh N.A. asks, did you like For All Mankind show? I don't remember if I saw that. I kind of think I did, but I kind of don't remember. I saw it advertised recently. I'll have to check it out and see. What I have been watching recently are, I watched the one available season of Away, which I don't remember which network it was on. I think it was either Netflix or Prime. But it was about, it has the actress from $1 Million Baby, Hilary Swank, and it was an interesting show. I don't want to do a full critique of it here, but it was very emotional. It was more of a human relationships story that happened to be set in space than it was like, a science fiction thing. Because it really focused on like the relationships and the emotions between the people, which is fine. They can do whatever they want. But more recently, I've been watching the National Geographic production of Mars from, I guess they initially released it in 2017, and interesting show. Yeah, that one deserves some more criticism. But it's always a treat to see space. But yeah, the show has a strange format. It flip-flops between 2033 when the first, 2033 and beyond, when the first mission to Mars is taking place, and then it flips back to 2016 to a pure documentary style with interviews with actual, non-fictional people like, Elon Musk and Robert Zubrin and various people at NASA and at space, companies or whatever, researchers and actual people. So then they flip-flop between the two. So basically, when the dramatic portion of the show reaches some sort of, climax or whatever, then they cut to a documentary from 2016 and it's really an odd choice. But I stuck with it through the first season. There is a second season, but I don't think I'll be picking it up again. But that's not to discourage any of you from checking it out. But um, I you know, I can exercise a healthy suspension of disbelief when it comes to dramatic, or when it comes to fictional content, because I just enjoy space, even though I know this scenario is unrealistic because they would have had redundant systems in place to account for this sort of scenario, or they wouldn't have had a door that opened directly onto the Martian surface without some sort of airlock, etc., etc. I do my best to not be the guy eating the cereal and pointing and and just enjoy the show. But all right. C. Walder says Boca Chica's close-ish to the equator. Close-ish. I mean, it's in South Texas, so that's about as close as you can get in the continental United States. Irfan Hussein asks if I'm in North Carolina. Yes, I am. I'm near Charlotte. Excuse me. Daz J. Says hello from the UK. Hello from North Carolina. Irfan Hussein asks, who is beside me? The devil on my shoulder? I don't know. There's nobody beside me. This is my microphone. Hello? Yeah, this is my microphone. I have it close to me because if I move it far away, you can't hear me as well, so I keep it close. Okay, JF says, scrubbed because of what? A cloud? Someone explain to me why we can't launch if there's a cloud. So, hold on. Old man yelling at cloud. We have a custom... Yeah, we have memberships now, so we have custom emojis, including an old man yelling at a cloud. By the way, member. I don't want to do a lot of advertising, but if you're interested, the memberships are available, so you can use some of the fun emojis. So the delay from earlier this morning, it was because there were still clouds in the way, and it's not the rocket that requires a clear sky, but the NASA experiment. Remember, the NASA experiment is to test out a landing assistance system, technology to scan the landing zone for lunar lander, and one of the parameters for that experiment is that they require a clear sky. West Texas usually has clear skies, but there were some clouds in the way. So in order to comply with their customer's requirement, that is, to comply with NASA's requirement for clear skies, they had to wait a couple of hours. But then they detected an issue with the electrical system. I guess there was an issue with power being supplied to the payloads, the scientific payloads, so they had to scrub the launch. So the delay was because of a cloud. The scrub was due to an electrical issue on the rocket. And these things happen. I mean, there are more scrubs than launches, honestly. So scrubs are the norm. It's better to scrub and fix your problems and try another day than it is to launch and lose your payloads because they weren't plugged in or whatever. Okay. So catching up. Irfan Hussein asks, will I go on Starship? That is highly unlikely. I'm not, I'm a software developer by trade, so I don't have the kind of skills that would be particularly useful on orbit. You know, I don't think they have any particular need to send up software developers. And I'm also no spring chicken anymore, so you know, I'm not like a test pilot or anything. So no, I don't think I'll be going on Starship unless it, you know, they manage to start a like space tourism, a thriving space tourism business, and seats are cheap enough that it's actually feasible for mere mortals to afford them. You know, without having to mortgage houses and things like that. Okay, so somebody mentioned, the night company mentioned possible launch in 22 hours. I have not seen any confirmation of a relaunch time from Blue Origin. However, it's pretty normal to do 24-hour cycles. So if they scrub, if a launch scrubs one day, unless there's an issue that I mean, like there's the electrical issue. So if it takes them any amount of time to to work on that, then you know that would be pushed out beyond 24 hours. But we'll just have to wait and see for official confirmation. Swaroop Chanda asks, where are they planning to land the space shuttle while returning from the International Space Station? Land or on water? So the space shuttle, there's no space shuttle anymore. I mean, the last space shuttle flight was in 2011? 2012, 2011. And perhaps you mean Crew Dragon? And Crew Dragon lands on water. It will land either in the Gulf of Mexico or in the Atlantic off the coast of Florida. I mean, they could potentially land it elsewhere, but those would be the ideal spots. You know, the DM2 mission, which took Doug Hurley and which took those two guys up, landed in the Gulf of Mexico. And this was a few months ago. Originally, the plan was to use the Crew Dragon's Super Draco engines. It has 4 pairs of 2 Super Draco engines around the outside of the Crew Dragon capsule. The original plan was to use those to propulsively land the capsule on the ground, but those plans were jettisoned because of NASA limitations. So they land on water instead. The Night Company loves me. That's good to know. I love you too, I think. Javier Rodriguez asks, is Saturn going to lose its rings? Likely so. There seems to be so the latest scientific knowledge seems to point to a fairly short lifespan for ring systems. You know, that is, eventually it'll get absorbed back into the planet. You know, so maybe a few tens of millions of years or whatever, but not terribly old in galactic terms. Okay, so catching up in chat. So I'm not sure where people are getting the 22 hours number for the do-over time for this new Shepard launch. I'm not seeing it on their Twitter. Maybe they posted it somewhere else, but yeah, I'd prefer to wait for I mean, if they've posted it somewhere else, then that's fine. But I generally, Twitter is the the be all end all of launch updates. Javier Rodriguez also asks, is there really alien life forms on Venus? Not that we know of. What we have found is phosphine, a chemical that on Earth is generally produced by life processes. Now, just like oxygen, I mean, just because we don't know how a particular chemical came to be, doesn't mean that it could. Just because the only way we know of a particular chemical coming into existence is through some sort of life process, doesn't mean that it could not have been generated abiotically. It just means that we don't know how it got there. So, so just like oxygen. I mean, if we were to detect oxygen in the atmosphere of an exoplanet, it doesn't necessarily mean there's life there, but it means that something produced it, through some chemical process or other, and it bears investigation and it bears analysis. So as I said in my last Space Week episode, what we should do is we should come up with a mission to go to Venus, not to physically go to, but to send a probe to Venus and study it, gather samples of the atmosphere, and do chemical analysis on them, and who knows, maybe we could even figure out some way to scoop up some Venusian atmosphere and boost it back to the Earth so we could study it in proper scientific facilities. That would be cool. But jumping to conclusions that, about the existence of life prematurely is inadvisable. You should always do the research and let the evidence lead you to lead you to the truth, rather than taking a tiny, tiny sliver of information and then making up a story around it, or making assumptions that aren't backed up by the evidence. The Night Company asks, do I think Blue Origin is the direct competitor of SpaceX? I mean, if Blue Origin can pull off their New Glenn project, then they will be a direct competitor of SpaceX's Starship, if SpaceX is able to complete Starship. But that's fine. I mean, you've got Coke and Pepsi. I mean, some people like Coke, some people like Pepsi. And those people are wrong, but they have every right to like whatever they like. Competition is good, and having more than one company performing a similar service is a good thing for everybody. Mike C., I have no idea what the architecture of their electrical system on new Shepard looks like. And I have no idea how the experiments are powered. I mean, with a battery, obviously, but as far as backups, I don't know how their payload stuff is set up. Anurag Ganesh asks, sir, is it possible to terraform Mars one day? Debatable. First of all, probably not, because Mars does not have a global magnetosphere. It has pockets of magnetic fields around the planet, but there's no large global magnetic field that protects it from ionized particles streaming from the sun like Earth's magnetosphere does. So that's one of the main reasons why Mars barely has an atmosphere. Its atmosphere is only, like a couple percent of the density of Earth's, because it used to have an atmosphere, but it was, picked away at for over eons by the solar wind, and so now it's just left with a very thin atmosphere of almost pure carbon dioxide. But as far as terraforming, so that would be challenge number one, is the lack of a global magnetosphere. Because even if you were to somehow fill the atmosphere of Mars with a whole bunch of oxygen and probably nitrogen or whatever from comets or whatever, source, if you could somehow fill that atmosphere, it would still get bombarded by solar radiation, to an extent much greater than Earth's atmosphere, because we are largely protected by our magnetosphere. And then the second problem is, of course, an atmosphere is trillions upon trillions of tons of gas. I mean, it may not look like much. It's clear, right? But an atmosphere is a very substantial thing. And in order to achieve anywhere close to, 1 bar or even a half a bar or a quarter of a bar of atmospheric pressure, of breathable atmospheric pressure on the surface of Mars, would take millennia at the least, I would think. Like, where are you going to get that material from? I mean, you can't just, conjure it out of... I mean, there's a lot of oxygen on Mars tied up in the rocks, because Mars is red because it's basically a planet full of rust. All the regolith, the Martian regolith, is iron oxide, or it's oxides, and oxide is oxygen infused in the minerals and the rocks. But extracting the oxygen back out is a very energy intensive process. It can be done, but it takes a ton of energy. So I don't know. Maybe in the future we'll have some sort of cheap, abundant energy source that will be able to do that chemical process at a phenomenal industrial scale, cheaply, and then, I don't know, maybe we can, build up the Martian atmosphere with a whole bunch of oxygen. We'll still have the issue of the fact that it is currently almost entirely carbon dioxide, which, would be a problem for any humans trying to breathe it. But it's a fun topic to think about. Terraforming is it's always fun. All right. Mark Desire says, don't forget that rings can be formed around a planet again. Yeah, so I would say that... oh, okay. I see. People are getting their 22 hours number from the Blue Origin webcast, which I guess was rescheduled for tomorrow. So yeah, we'll operate on the assumption that they will probably attempt another launch tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Central Time, where they're located, 3 p.m. GMT. And once they provide some official confirmation of that, then we'll know for sure. Putra Pratama, I'm sorry, Google can't translate that. I presume it's Hindi or one of the other Indian languages, but written in Latin characters, and Google just can't make heads or tails of it. It doesn't know what to do with it, unfortunately. Javier also asks, is the sun going to burn out and explode? Also, is there a rogue comet or asteroid coming to Earth to make humans go extinct like the dinosaurs? Well, not that we know of. I mean, there could be, some long period comet or something that we haven't seen before in the modern age that comes in unexpectedly and we have to react to it. But generally speaking, we can see things. I mean, anything large enough to pose an extinction risk is going to be probably noticed far ahead of time. Now, smaller objects, like, for example, the biggest The biggest um, the biggest asteroid, I won't say impact, but the biggest asteroid event of the past number of years was the Chelyabinsk meteor that exploded, was it 20 miles over Chelyabinsk, Russia, back in, what was it, 2011, 2013, something like that. Very cool, but also very damaging. It exploded very high in the atmosphere. If it had exploded closer to the ground and directly over the city, Chelyabinsk would have been destroyed. It was the power of, um, you know, many Hiroshima bombs. I don't remember the exact yield, but it was a large blast, on the order of a mid-grade modern nuclear weapon. And that was the size. What was like 60 feet long or something. It was the size of a bus, I think. Um, so there's a huge amount of energy that gets released when uh, a large chunk of rock flies through the atmosphere and heats up to thousands of degrees. Because remember, they're coming in at, 20 kilometers a second or something, and and so it just generates an enormous amount of heat, which causes the rock or the comet or whatever to explode, like Tunguska in 1908, also in Russia, leveled thousands of square miles of forest. I think it detonated much closer to the ground, but detonated it broke apart and exploded closer to the ground. But so an extinction level event we'll probably know about far enough advance that we can mount some sort of response to it. But these sort of rogue rocks that are the size of houses and cars and things like that, we may not see it coming. I mean, we don't normally see those sorts of things until they're right on top of us. So that's more of a local or regional risk that could happen anywhere at any time. And it's always been that way. But obviously we have not seen large numbers of, bombardments from the sky historically, so they're infrequent events. Zlata Basic says, warm greetings from Cape Town in South Africa. Thank you for being here. Hara Hara Mahadeva says, everything in our solar system are for balance, are for the balance of our solar system. If anything happens to any planet, then all the solar system is going to be affected. Not really, because the only way other planets, or the only way other planets in the solar system would be affected is if the trajectory or the mass of Earth were to change. And if a rogue planet Mars came hurtling out of the abyss and ran into our planet, then yeah, the solar system might be, the orbits of the other planets would be perturbed. But, that hasn't happened since, since the moon was formed, because that's the theory of how it formed. It was a Mars-sized object hit the Earth and then formed into the moon. But so the rest of the solar system, Earth could, blow up, and the rest of the solar system would basically be fine. In order to affect the other planets, there would need to be a shift in mass, and the mass of the Earth is truly insignificant compared with, for example, Jupiter. Jupiter is the big kid on the block. Jupiter affects, most of the other planets and tugs at their orbits, and is the reason for the asteroid belt, and is the reason why we don't get hit by more things, because Jupiter sucks them up. So even if Earth disappeared, the rest of the solar system would be mostly okay. And I do apologize for my scratching of my nose. I know it looks stupid, but oh my gosh. I took an Allegra earlier, but my allergies are still getting me. The Night Company asks, do I think Delta IV Heavy will finally take off? I hope so. Well, I mean, honestly, I could care less about the National Reconnaissance Mission, but generally speaking, successful rocket launches are helpful for the industry. When there are mishaps, it sets everybody back because, you know, it reduces trust in the industry, in the launch business, and it costs the launch providers money, which then affects their other operations. You know, their ability to like they may have to bump up prices in order to recoup costs or something. But so I hope it launches. Warhawk Me says Elon should loan them a power supply that's reliable. Elon knows a couple things about batteries, doesn't he? Funu Das asks, what was scrubbed? It was the Blue Origin New Shepard rocket launching some scientific payloads into a suborbital trajectory into space. And it's expected that they will probably try to launch again in the morning tomorrow. Ryan Allen Henry says, funny there's no flat earthers debunking space flights live. Well, if there were, they would be booted because flat earthers coming to a space stream is invariably always an attempt to troll, and we don't tolerate trolls. I mean, if somebody wants to discuss something, okay, but in the middle of a live stream is really not the time to do that. I mean, they can come to Discord or discuss it in the comments after the fact or whatever, but when we're trying to manage a live stream chat is not the time to get into a deep discussion of why they think their ridiculous and contradictory theory is better than, 2,000 years of scientific precedent. Ataruxo says, and I say your name a lot, and if I say it incorrectly, please tell me the correct pronunciation, because I like to pronounce names correctly, because they are how you identify yourself. The latest theory about Tunguska is that it actually was a bolide, an asteroid that bounces off our atmosphere, and that's why we never found the actual rock or its fragments. But I don't believe bolide means it bounces off the atmosphere. I think a bolide is just a category of space rock, including the ones that crater. And the Tunguska event was an airburst. It was not a cratering event. It was an airburst event. And it was definitely inside the atmosphere when it exploded. I mean, there wouldn't have been that sort of destruction if it had bounced off. There would only have been that effect if it had entered the atmosphere and then exploded above the surface. So I'm not sure if you can maybe provide a link or something in Discord to the article you're getting that information from. But, I mean, Tunguska could only really have been an airburst event from an object that, an asteroid that entered the atmosphere and then exploded over the surface, not bounced off into space. But that does happen. I mean, there are rocks that come in and then bounce off. Sometimes you see videos of them. The people will basically you see a fireball crossing the sky, and sometimes accompanied a few minutes later by loud sonic booms or whatever, depending on how deeply it enters the atmosphere. Funu Das asks, is SpaceX better than Blue Origin? I mean, we shouldn't think in terms of better or worse. They're two companies doing two different things. SpaceX launches their Falcon 9 rockets and occasionally Falcon Heavy. They're working on Starship. And Blue Origin has their suborbital New Shepard, and they're working on the BE-4 engine and New Glenn. They're different companies that are working in the same field, so I wish them both well. And they're working on new technologies and new systems, and that's a good thing, because in space a lot of times we get stuck with, especially when government agencies are. I mean, I love the heck out of NASA, but a lot of times when government agencies, government contracts, and when politicians are basically in charge of the management of space programs, you get stuck with a bunch of, legacy hardware and legacy companies that overcharge for their products and services. And some of the, the new modern companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin are helping to shake up that legacy business. So watch out, ULA and Boeing, etc. Javier asks, how was the ozone layer created? Or, well, how did it come to be? Ozone, I think, I am not a chemist, but I think the ozone is emitted by life processes. And maybe it's produced by upper atmosphere interaction with the ionized solar particles. I'm not actually sure. I don't want to blow any smoke or mislead you, but good question, and would be a fun study sometime to learn how the ozone layer is created. Now, I know that human activity can damage the ozone layer, and has, depending on what chemicals we spew into the atmosphere. Because it's all chemistry, like the whole functioning of the atmosphere and the mix of the soup of various gases in the atmosphere is all subject to chemical reactions and whatever. So if we emit chemicals that are going to react with ozone, such as break it down into other into other chemicals or into their constituent elements or whatever, then that's a problem. Warhawk Me says Starlink 12 has a launch time Sunday, September 27th at 2:43 p.m. UTC. Okay, I'll have to look that up and put it on the schedule, which I will link in the chat. Harry Colby says the suborbital trajectory will decay very fast in case of a failure. No, a suborbital trajectory, there's no issue of decay. I mean, it's not orbiting. It goes straight up and it comes straight back down. Or in the case of some sounding rockets or whatever, it arcs, but it's not a matter of decay. I mean, you can have orbital decay if you're orbiting, but I mean, a suborbital trajectory is just ballistic, basically, in a parabolic arc. In the case of Blue Origin, it's a very narrow parabola because it goes straight up and it comes straight back down. Finn Rossman says, is this the first test launch of Blue Origin? No, this is, I think, the 13th overall launch of the new Shepard rocket, and this is the 7th consecutive launch of this specific vehicle. So this, well, it will be tomorrow when they try again. So yeah, so this specific booster has lifted off six times before. So it's not a test launch; it's a production launch, and their customers are 12 different scientific payloads, including one from NASA. Almighty Bisty says, any news about New Glenn? I don't have any, but if somebody wants to do some poking around, there may be some information out there. But Blue Origin is not terribly communicative about their progress. So I think for now they're focusing more so on the BE4 engine. First of all, because they need the engine in order for the New Glenn to work, and also because they have a customer. They have ULA, which is going to be using the beefy engine, the BE4 engine on their Vulcan Centaur rocket, which is also in development. Daksh33 asks, can ISRO and Blue Origin work together? Sure, why not? I mean, I don't, off the top of my head, know of any plans to do so, but I know that, sometimes ISRO launches payloads on Arianespace rockets. ISRO could do the same on a Blue Origin New Glenn if they get that developed. I think it's unlikely that Blue Origin would launch anything on an ISRO rocket, because currently Blue Origin isn't in the payload business. They're in the launching and the engine business, whereas SpaceX is in the satellite business with Starlink, but they also have their own launch capability, so they're using their own rockets to launch their own satellites. So end-to-end arrangement, very efficient. So I know that this whole time I've been behind a few minutes in the chat. That's because I tend toward a little on the verbose side in my responses. And by the time I'm done answering one question, a few more have been asked. So, but I do need to wrap it up soon. Okay. Here's a good question. Dandelion asks, how many stratospheres do you have to fly through to get into weightlessness? I think what he means is how high do you need to go to get into weightlessness? That's the thing. Is weightlessness is so the International Space Station, orbiting at approximately 400 kilometers. The astronauts aboard the ISS experience weightlessness, but they are still subject to approximately 90% of the pull of 1 g of gravity. So they experience about 0.9 g's of gravity at that altitude. There's still almost as much pull of gravity up there as there is on the surface of the Earth. The difference is they're traveling at 17,000 miles an hour, 17,500 miles per hour, or whatever that is in kilometers. So basically, orbit is essentially permanent free fall. So if you can imagine, if New Shepard were to fly straight up 250 miles, 400 kilometers, to where the space station orbits, if it wasn't going sideways in any way, it was just going straight up, then as soon as you stopped thrusting, or as soon as it came to a stop at the apex of its trajectory, it would start to fall, and it would be subject to 0.9 g's of downward acceleration due to the pull of Earth's gravity. So if you imagine you go up to that altitude, but you're moving, you're moving parallel to the ground, you would, if you weren't going fast enough, you would arc down toward the ground, and then you would fall back into the atmosphere. But if you go faster and faster, eventually your trajectory is going to take you not in an arcing downward toward the ground, but rather arcing downward around the curve of the planet. And so that's why they have to be going so fast. They're basically going so fast that they are falling, the rate of their falling toward the Earth, that 0.9 Gs of downward acceleration, is counteracted by their moving forward parallel to the planet. They're basically always falling. So if you imagine Journey to the Center of the Earth, when they fell down that deep hole and they just kept falling and falling and falling, that's kind of like it is in orbit, except without the atmosphere around you. I mean, there's a very tenuous atmosphere of a few, stray atoms or whatever up there, but it's still quite a pure vacuum, purer than we can create here on Earth, but it's not quite like deep space vacuum. But so the key to being in orbit is going at the exact correct speed so that you counteract the pull of Earth's gravity, because even up there in orbit, there's still gravity. Hopefully that was clear enough. R2 drone PR, flirting with the flat Earth, no thank you. Look, the only way a person can believe in the flat Earth is if they proactively choose to ignore every piece of scientific evidence that has ever been produced over the past 2,000 years that points to no other conclusion than that we live on a globe. They also have to ignore the fact that any night, on a clear night, they can look up and see satellites orbiting over our head. I can tell you, if you tell me your location on the Earth, I can go to a website, or you can pull up an app on your phone, and it will tell you exactly when and where to look for this space station, and you can see it fly overhead. If you have a telescope, you can point your telescope at it, and you can see, golly gee, it looks like the space station with the solar panels and everything. You can take a picture of the space station transiting the sun if your timing is very good and you're you know exactly when and where it's going to happen. And you can see the space station silhouetted against the moon. We have millions upon millions of photographs of the Earth that have been taken from orbit. Every day, there are many thousands of photographs of the Earth taken from orbit, from various orbital altitudes, from low Earth orbit, medium Earth orbit, geostationary orbit, and for a while we even had the Discover Epic camera taking pictures of the Earth from the Earth-Sun L1 Lagrange point 1 million miles away toward the sun. Amazing pictures, just very cool. And you have to deny all of that. You have to basically say that every piece of empirical evidence that has ever been generated, every observation of every human in the world, of the movement of the stars and the behaviors of the night sky at different latitudes, etc., the phases of the moon, solar eclipses, the behaviors of the seasons, everything in the entire world is some sort of grand fabrication designed to, what, like sell products or something? No. The only way to truly believe in a flat Earth is to be insane. You cannot possibly believe in a flat Earth if you have a rational bone in your body. It is not possible. And I think a lot of the vocal flat earthers out there are just in it for the attention. They're in it for the attention and to try to make a buck off of gullible people who are easily misled. That's all I'll say on that right now. If you can't tell, I am passionate about that topic. Warhawk Me, good question. Do you know how many launches before BO/Blue Origin sends up a human? I don't know, and they don't know, in fact. I mean, I guess they probably have an internal game plan that they have, but I think that they may have pursued a human launch sometime this year, except I think the COVID situation really set that whole thing back. So my guess would be perhaps sometime next year, like maybe mid-year, something like that. It's a total swag, but that's what I'm going to go with. So, yeah, the Starman in his Tesla Roadster that SpaceX launched back in 2018 is actually relatively close to Mars right now, about 8 million miles, which is not too far in astronomical terms. It's not going to Mars, but it's passing relatively close. Just looking for more questions. Javier Rodriguez asks, is it true that Apollo or Armstrong landed on the moon and stuck an American flagpole on the moon, or did they just film it in a studio to make it look like they landed on the moon? Of course they landed on the moon. First of all, millions of people witnessed the launch with their own eyes, and hundreds of millions of people witnessed the launch live on television, and something like a billion people or something, a large portion of the population of the world, watched the moon landing live as it happened. And remember, it wasn't just one mission. It wasn't just Apollo 11. There was Apollo 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, all went to the moon. 13, of course, had an issue and they had to bring it back. But yeah, I mean, there are hundreds upon hundreds, I don't know an exact number, but many hundreds of, perhaps thousands of photos taken on the moon from cislunar space in between the Earth and the moon, videos, photos, things we'd never seen before because we'd never sent anybody there. They did experiments on the moon, the hammer and feather experiment. They drove rovers around the moon. You can, watch those videos and calculate the trajectory of the dust flying up from the rover wheels and determine that A, there is no atmosphere affecting that dust, and B, the trajectory of the dust matches the gravitational pull of the moon. They left reflectors on the moon that lasers today use to keep track of the exact distance between the Earth and the moon. The retroreflectors. You can, if you have a sensitive enough receiver, you may just get a few photons back, but if you have a sensitive enough receiver, you can bounce your own laser off the moon and verify that it's there. Furthermore, we've sent orbiters up to the moon since then, and have imaged multiple of the Apollo landing sites from lunar orbit. So yeah, they absolutely went. And it's supremely disappointing that, more than 51 years now since the first moon landing, so many people question whether it really happened. I mean, it was, in the estimation of many, the greatest achievement of the human species. And there are lots of people who doubt that it happened. It's very disappointing. We need to stop trying to erase the past and use it to inspire us into the future. And if your question was not asked genuinely, then well, shame on you. Oh yeah, definitely challenge Buzz Aldrin and get punched in the face for it. Although he's a few years older now than he was when he punched that one reporter. So I mean that one unscrupulous would-be documentary filmmaker. But he did. You know what? I wish we could line up all the astronauts and punch that guy in the face, because he was a real piece of work. Buzz Aldrin is still alive. Neil Armstrong passed a few years ago, but Buzz Aldrin is still alive. He's quite old. Yeah, Neil Armstrong, I believe Neil Armstrong died just a few months after the last shuttle flight. I'm not sure what significance that has, but yeah, those two things happened within the same 12-month time span. A lot of discussion, scanning for questions. And I think this will be the last question, and then I need to wrap it up. Javier asks, how was Pluto confirmed a dwarf planet, and how did it become a dwarf planet? Well, I mean, the classification of a dwarf planet, that's an administrative thing. Like, Pluto's just out there orbiting. It doesn't care what we call it. We could call it a fish for all it cares. But I grew up calling Pluto a planet. But they, what are they? The International Astronomical Union, I guess, the IAU. Aren't they the governing body for the classification of things like that? With assistance from Neil deGrasse Tyson, I guess. They decided that, because since Pluto was discovered in the early 20th century, we've discovered other trans-Neptunian objects, other objects in the Kuiper Belt, including objects that are almost as big as Pluto, I guess. And so the IAU decided to refine their definition of they either decided to refine their definition of what constitutes a planet, or they decided to refine the way in which that definition was applied to Pluto, and so they decided that it qualified as a dwarf planet, not a planet. But either way, Pluto doesn't care. It's still doing what it always did. But for those of us who grew up calling it a planet, and who now see textbooks saying that there are 8 planets, it seems like a step backwards. But that's purely nostalgia, and scientifically speaking, it's not a significant issue. But all right. Well, thank you all so much for coming. I know we did not get a lunch today, but hopefully tomorrow, and then also Friday, the Delta IV Heavy. Saturday. I'm sorry. Check the schedule, which I'll link again in the chat. And yeah, until tomorrow or until next time, keep it raw. Take care, and I will catch you all later. I have a new fade out that hopefully works. We'll see. Bye for now.
the time, you'll never hear what anybody else has to say. And therefore all you'll have to talk about is your own conversation. The same is true for people who think all the time. That means, when I use the word think, talking to yourself, subvocal conversation, the constant chit-chat of symbols and images and talk and words inside your skull. Now, if you do that all the time, you'll find that you've nothing to think about except thinking. And just as you have to stop talking to hear what others have to say, you have to stop thinking to find out what life is about. And the moment you stop thinking, you become into immediate contact with the unspeakable world. The force of liberation will blow the world to pieces.